We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
Welcome back, everyone. 46 after the hour, and today we return to one of my favorite, or I guess I should say least favorite, rant topics, and that is drug testing in America. As you know, I am here solely because of drug testing in America. I had a great information technology career that was derailed by a failed hair test, and it has been my pet peeve ever since. It's been one of the main reasons I do this. I mean, I'm all for marijuana legalization, but part of why I want to legalize marijuana is to end drug testing in this country. And there's a bunch of stories on the news wires today that have really gotten me angry with respect to this issue. And the first one is the latest result from the NFL, the National Football League. Josh Gordon, the wide receiver from the Cleveland Browns, it could be the end of his career as he has just failed another drug test. Now, the saga of Josh Brown is a long and contentious one. He was a fantastic college football player at Baylor University, but failed multiple drug tests there. And he was kicked off of the team at Baylor. And despite that, the Cleveland Browns drafted him. And in 2013, he was the number one statistical wide receiver in the league. He was the best receiver in the league. And that was despite the fact he had to sit out 2 games because he had tested positive for codeine, the first time he had failed a drug test on the NFL. Now, that's a guy performing in 14 games who set the league record in 2013 against players that were playing 16 games. They had a 2-game head start on the guy, and he still outperformed the rest of them. But then he failed another drug test, this time for marijuana, and the Cleveland Browns suspended him for an entire year. The best receiver in the NFL got suspended an entire year for marijuana. This was juxtaposed against the forthcoming news after that was Ray Rice bludgeoning his wife unconscious in an elevator, and he received a 2-game suspension for that. And that was the ensuing controversy as, we're going to suspend the best wide receiver for a year for pot, but one of the best running backs only 2 games for domestic violence. That led to a re-examination of the NFL's drug testing policies and punishments for such. His suspension got reduced to a 10-game suspension, and he was able to come back and play for the Browns in the last 6 games of the year. And that's where we pick the story up. Josh Gordon, after being suspended for the first 10 games of the season, came back in 2014, played the last 5 games, and did not perform up to people's expectations. He caught 24 passes for 303 yards and no touchdowns in 5 games. So averaging about 60 yards a game, which is well below what he was doing in 2013. The stories I'm reading are holding this against Josh Gordon, saying that after he had failed his marijuana test, he had a chance to come back and prove to the league that he was still a great player and didn't perform. Now, folks, I would attest that to being out of the league for 10 weeks, missing the training camps, not having the offense used to you being in the huddle and running plays. There are so many factors that could have had something to do with Josh Gordon's subpar performance in 2014. And many of those, I believe, are related to the fact he got sat for so long. I mean, these are elite athletes. If they're not, playing and practicing, every week to the top levels, they're going to fall off. And it looks like that's what happened with Josh Gordon. They suspended him. The Browns suspended him in the last game of the year because he missed a walkthrough. As someone you're supposed to show up for a walkthrough, and so violation of team rules. They suspended him for a game. To me, that seems a little bit suspect, because had he played that game, he would have become a vested veteran in the NFL, right? It has to do with their contracts and how they can become free agents and so forth. A little suspicious of me, if you ask me, to suspend him for the final game, knowing that that is what would keep him from being a vested veteran, and therefore give Cleveland more latitude to be able to dismiss him if they wanted to in the future. Now, the next thing that has happened, and this is the most recent drug test, is he has failed a drug test not for drugs, not for steroids, not for codeine, not for marijuana. The latest drug test, he failed for alcohol. And that's because he entered a guilty plea to a DUI charge in September. And because of that DUI charge, he was now being tested for alcohol, which he has failed. So it's bad enough these players aren't allowed to use legal marijuana if they play for the Seattle Seahawks or the Denver Broncos. But now they can't even use legal alcohol? It seems to me like the NFL is just continues setting Josh Gordon up for a chance to fail. Now, there are many people that argue, well, he shouldn't be smoking pot, and if he got in the DUI, he shouldn't be drinking alcohol. And those may be valid criticisms, but we have to weigh those against his value to the team and his career as a professional athlete. So I'm still upset about this Josh Gordon situation, because this latest violation for testing positive for alcohol could lead to him being banned for at least 1 year, if not drummed all the way out of the NFL. It is time for the NFL and other employers to stop moralizing, to stop trying to hold their employees accountable for what choice of recreational substance they use when they're off the field. These players shouldn't be tested for alcohol. They shouldn't be tested for marijuana. Let them adults be adults. Now, continuing along the drug test stories of today, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is back in the news. He is continuing on his quest to ensure that people of lesser means, poor people, desperate people in the state of Wisconsin who are applying for temporary assistance to needy families, something that we've called welfare, supplemental nutrition assistance program, something known as food stamps, or in Wisconsin it's called food share. And not only that, Medicaid and unemployment. Now, there's a lot of roadblocks to overcome for the governor if he wants to install this sort of program. First of all, with the supplemental nutrition assistance program, the program will not allow states to add other criteria for qualification. So he's asking the federal government for a waiver to allow them to drug test for food stamps. He also wants to get drug testing for the temporary assistance for needy families. That's another thing he will need a waiver for. And the most offensive part of this is this idea that somehow, as a poor person, you need to prove you're not a criminal before you can get your benefits. And remember, folks, these benefits are paid for by all of us, and in many cases, paid for by the people that are getting the benefits. People have this false notion that folks on welfare are born poor, they've always been poor, and they'll be on welfare all their life. Welfare dependency, intergenerational welfare dependency. And I'm not denying that that does happen, but it is such a small portion of the people that are in need of welfare payments, whether it be food stamps, rent assistance, whatever it might be. And many times these people are people that had jobs, had careers, and whose tax money was paying into all of these programs that they had never used, who then fall on hard times through a layoff, through an injury, through an illness, and then require that safety net. So when I hear about these plans to drug test people, of course, we have to understand that the drug testing for welfare was declared unconstitutional in the way that Florida did it. Florida did so by just drug testing everybody. Anybody who wants welfare, everyone gets drug tested. The courts decided that that was unconstitutional because it's an unreasonable search and seizure. There's no probable cause to believe someone is committing a drug crime just because they're signing up for welfare. Now the states are all lining up to come up with all these methods to get around that constitutional problem, to develop the probable cause. Utah pioneered this by coming up with a questionnaire. You got to answer this questionnaire, and based on the answers to the questions, then a social worker will determine whether or not it's likely that you have a problem with drugs or alcohol. Some of these things can include whether or not you've ever been busted for drugs and alcohol, whether or not you've ever failed a drug test in the past. Answering honestly on those questions in the affirmative means you're going to get another drug test. And the offensive talking point that goes with this, and I picked this one out, there's another story out of Montana and so forth, but there's this, have you ever seen those postcards that people put on the internet? They're called EE cards, whatever. And this one says, shouldn't you have to pass a urine test to get a welfare check, since I have to pass one to earn it for you? And once again, folks, that goes to that stereotype, that idea that the people that are collecting welfare somehow never also paid the taxes that cover that welfare. Most of them have. And to me, the most offensive part of this is this idea that since you, the worker, are being oppressed, then poor people ought to be oppressed as well. Well, since I have to take a piss test for my job, you should have to take a piss test for a welfare check. No, you shouldn't have to take a piss test for your job either. The solution to your oppression is not to foster that oppression onto those weaker than you. The solution is to stand up against this drug testing oppression for all people. And this paternalistic, condescending attitude people have toward the poor, like, well, if we're going to give you some taxpayer money, you got to spend it the way we want you to. They always claim that we've got to do this so that parents won't be using the diaper money to buy drugs. Folks, do you realize that when they do drug testing of people on welfare, they come up with much lower rates of drug test failures? They found it was like 2% when they went and did this in Florida. And part of the reason why the testing results are so low, surprise, drugs cost money. If you're poor, being on drugs using drugs does not mean you're going to let your kids starve or go without diapers. And if you are addicted to that point, do you really think a drug test is going to stop them? Do you really think they're going to be honest on that questionnaire? All we do through denying benefits to poor families that deserve them is harm their children and put those poor people further behind, more likely to be homeless, more likely to commit crimes to survive. It's time to end drug testing for everyone, including the poor. That's all the time we got. Thanks for joining us. I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,